Welcome to the Machinations tutorial for the Spurpunk Tower Defense game. The goal of this video series is mainly to show the audience how Machinations works and to introduce the basic design of the Spurpunk economy. It's also to briefly introduce the audience to basic economic concepts and how they relate to games. First, we should talk about economies and economic modeling. At a very high level, an economy is just a set of scarce resources flowing through a system. Economists build models that define what the resources are, who owns those resources, and how those resources are transferred through a system. So first we kind of have this basic model of an economy. You've got kind of two groups of people. You've got the households and the firms. The basic way that the resources are flowing is that households, they work for companies and companies pay them money, and then those households use that money to buy products that the firms create. So I mean, it can get very complicated. For example, you can introduce like the financial sector, the government sector, overseas sectors, but in general, the more complicated a model is, it doesn't necessarily mean that it's more useful. So when you're designing an economic model, you kind of want to focus on defining your resources and defining the kind of big picture and just limiting it to that. So one way that this kind of comes into our machinations models and things like that is that we won't necessarily have to be exact on the numbers, and we won't have to model out every tiny detail of our game. But in general, we just want to get a high-level picture of the essence of what's going on. What are our resources? How are they moving through the system? And what are the kind of different entities in our economy? So this is kind of the basic diagram that we used when planning out and creating our machinations model. We based our plans on this diagram, just to kind of give us a big picture of what the economy is, what the resources are, and how those resources are supposed to kind of flow through the economy. So you see this, it's got this nice legend here. It tells us, you get gems from playing the game. You spend those gems on unlocking your gacha chests, and you also spend them on upgrading your weapons, and you kind of that's kind of the what we based our machinations model on. So just kind of to go briefly through this, you start over here at the play facility where the user plays the game. They get elements and coins and gems, and then after they play the game, they go to this kind of chest facility where they either spend money to open chests, or they wait a certain period of time before they can open a chest, and once they open a chest, they can get all sorts of little goodies. They can get spells, they can get towers, they can get cards, they can get elements or coins, and then once they go through all their chests, then they can move to this upgrade facility where they will spend those resources that they got and get better versions of their cards or their towers. And after that, they kind of go back into the play facility, but first they have to choose what level they want to do, and maybe they want to play an earlier level because they don't feel like they can beat the newest level, or maybe they want to try and get the newest level, and that will unlock stars, and it'll unlock new levels depending on whether they got enough stars. A few notes about the limitations of machinations before we jump into the actual model. Machinations is more of a diagramming tool, and it isn't really supposed to be used to model out every tiny detail about your game. So things like unlocking new levels don't necessarily work the way they would in the game, but the point is to get a feel for the progression, how the economy feeds itself, and how the resources are flowing through the game's economy. The other thing to note is that you have this resource here, time. Machinations doesn't really do a great job modeling time as a resource, So if a user, for example, has to wait 8 hours before they can unlock a chest, there isn't really a great way to model that. In our implementation, we made chests a reward for playing the game as opposed to something that just kind of is disjoint from the game and happens on a schedule. Um, but I think the basic idea is still there, so it doesn't really make a difference, and it kind of helps build the flow. So I think that's an important thing to remember when you're building your machinations models, is that um, you can kind of fudge the details just as long as the general flow is being represented accurately. One other thing that I should mention is that this is what we started from, but as we went through the project, the some of the terminology changed and some of the exact details of this diagram changed. Um, for example, this doesn't really mention cards at all. It talks about weapons, but the terminology that we settled on was that the chests should unlock cards, which the user can upgrade at the upgrade facility.